What's up again, everybody? Long time no see. I decided to take a couple of days off after all of that commentating and then all of that streaming for 14,000 subscribers, and here we are back at it again with something really interesting to talk about. We are in what is perhaps the most confounding, confusing, exciting, tumultuous metas that we've ever had in the Flesh and Blood, really history, I would say. And looking at this as it's played out for the past 3 weeks is absolutely fascinating, so we're going to break it down. We're going to talk about where we began with this meta, going into it from a theory perspective, and what we've seen sort of pan out over the past 3 to 4 weeks of theory crafting and then competitive tournaments. So to understand where we are now with this sort of culmination thus far of the meta in this previous weekend's Calling Birmingham, which, by the way, as an aside, fantastic coverage by Push the Point, fantastic event run, I believe it was by Living Realms. It was a really great overall stream. It was very enjoyable. I loved the little kind of like cut-ins here and there where you could hear from a variety of the players or personalities within the game. Thought it was fantastic, so go watch that, check that out, it's really good. But to understand where we arrived to with that event, it helps to go all the way back to the beginning, and that is right before the battle-hardened Cincinnati, because right before that happened, we indeed had the new Dusk Till Dawn set release. And by and large, a lot of players and a lot of content creators like myself kind of theorized that Lexi was the dominant deck in the format, Dromai had a large place in the format, and that Levia was going to be incredibly good in the format, and then heroes after that would be just sort of a step down, or in some cases, several steps down, depending on what hero we're talking about. And we'd sort of have like maybe a 3, maybe a 4 deck overall meta, with a lot of heroes being playable and a lot of heroes being accessible or fairly successful in the meta. And to some degree, I think that's correct. Though, if we look at the results of the Battle-Hardened Cincinnati, which we can put up here, this is the top 8 results of the Battle-Hardened Cincinnati. Very few people would have expected Iyslander to actually take that down. Rhea picking up the win in Cincinnati on Iyslander. But if you look at the rest of this, a lot of this makes sense. I mean, there's a Lexi in there. Not as many as I think everyone would have considered. There's a Dromai in there, though I think because it was Mara Ferris, I think there were some people that thought to themselves, maybe Dromai isn't as prevalent, or won't be as prevalent as high finishes are concerned. There is a Levia in there. Pat Eshke actually top-8'd Levia. Sam showed up and showed out on Azuri, which is something I talked about a lot, simply because I believe in Azuri and I believe in Sam's capability to play it. And then you have a couple of Briars, which I think are underrated but can always sort of spike. And then Bravo. And the Bravo was the real question mark, where people, I guess, didn't expect Bravo to necessarily take that far of a step forward at this point. Simply because, yes, it may have had good matchups if you could play defensively, but not a lot of people were really taking that route. And so this is your top 8. And from this point, Lexi continued to be viewed as the de facto best deck in the format. Yes, it lost to Iyslander, or, well, really, the field, I should say, lost to Iyslander, with Iyslander taking the win. But is that really that big of a deal, or is this just a fluke? Maybe, just a really great performance by Rhea, or maybe Rhea just dodged a couple of tough matchups and got to the top 8 and then kind of pushed your way through. There's a sort of a question mark on this, exactly this result, with the belief that, I think Lexi is in a really good spot, and I think Dromai's in a very good spot if they can avoid these Briars and other Rune Blades. And then these other heroes, maybe we just had a little bit of an underperforming Levia. Maybe Levia is on the way and on the rise up, just haven't figured her out yet. And then after a week of practice and prep, we had the Battle-Hardened Chicago, which was cast by myself and by Flake, and the results, well, they look a little bit different, but not terribly different. In fact, Rhea still sitting on top and picking up the win. Iyslander isn't necessarily a meme, or it wasn't a fluke that Rhea picked it up. Rhea, great player. She destroyed the competition, but also Iyslander just has a lot of tools against these heroes that, you know, you can go toe-to-toe with. Now, this back and forth argument of like, okay, Dromai has a lot of like play into Iyslander if you can build the board, if you can play around like the frostbites and the incidental, you know, disruption. There's a lot of really powerful things that she can do. But you know what? Rhea showed that you can go through Dromais with Iyslander. That being said, look at the 2 Dromais now instead of 1, and 3 Lexis instead of 2, 2 Icelanders, and yet still a Levia lurking in there. And so maybe there's this belief, even though the event itself was full of bravos and full of like a couple of other big like show out heroes like Levias, which we did get one in the top 8. Maybe there's a belief that that hero isn't as able to cut forward into this top 8 because you're still getting pushed down by Lexis, and Iyslander has power over really all of this on the board in a lot of respects. And so then you ask the question, well, how's that going to affect Calling Birmingham? And it also begs the question, are all of these results the result of a regional meta? Is this just this specific area, or is this indicative of what the game looks like right now, what the meta looks like right now? And we get an even crazier change when we switch over to the Calling Birmingham. So this is the top 8 for this weekend's Calling Birmingham. And there's a lot to take away from this. First of all, that's a lot of Bravo. That's a whole lot of Bravo. The question mark of what is going to take the control spot now that Oldham has ridden off into the sunset, I think has been answered fairly definitively. The answer is just another Guardian. It's just Bravo. People did not look at the results of like Battle-Hardened Chicago and say, you know, Bravo isn't able to convert. They just said, well, I can just do it. Other people maybe got close, but I can just do it. And you know what? 3 Bravos making it into the top 8. Proving that they can go toe-to-toe with a variety of heroes and have good matchup spreads into a variety of heroes. If you're playing a more defensive Bravo, you still have the ability to fatigue out a Lexi, particularly now they don't have as big of a spike turn with their gauntlets, right? You take away Bullseye Bracers, you have the ability to kind of push that through, which is quite good. You also look at, after looking at this, you look at the matchup into a variety of other heroes, like for example into Dromai, and Bravo just has a lot of poppers, and Dromai has to go backwards in time almost to build the deck and the sort of long game strategies back into the deck. Either build the deck completely differently, play big dragons, or just add in a package for specifically Bravo to play a more long game control oriented style, because it's clear at this point that Bravo is here to stay. But then also you look at the other results here. We have 2 Katsus sitting at the top there. 2 Katsus is shocking in a lot of respects, but really not so much. Katsu did get a good number of tools to use in Outsiders. At the same time, though, we never really saw him use it. And here we see it used to great effect, and in fact it was also used to great effect at the PTI event in the Battle-Hardened Chicago. If you watched the PTI event we streamed at, there was a Katsu in the top there as well, going toe-to-toe with a variety of heroes. Now, why Katsu all of a sudden? Well, Katsu has the ability to really push a lot of damage against a hero that also wants to push damage, so it could conceivably race a Lexi. What else could it do? Well, Katsu can also just deal very deadly damage to a bunch of dragons. It can deal with a board full of dragons very, I would say fairly easily. Maybe not very easily, is perhaps not correct, but it can deal with a board full of dragons. So if you're looking at the top 2 most represented heroes being Lexi and Dromai, well, why not Katsu? The other question is, why not something like Phi? And you could look at Phi as well into a field full of those 2. That's not the only thing you have to think about. Iyslander has been showing up for the past 2 weeks of decently high competitive play, right, in the form of Battle Hardens, which are, you know, definitely a step up from anything else below that, like armories or, you know, like lower level play. But do we respect it enough? That's the question you ask yourself. Do you pack more AB? Do you, you know, bring in the ability to, like, more blues, for example, to pitch into if your deck doesn't have that many? And if you ask your questions and answer those with, no, I don't really respect Iyslander, well, look at what ended up winning the calling this past weekend. You probably need to respect Iyslander at this point. And the interesting thing too, and we could talk about this in a whole completely separate video, is the Iyslander lists that are in the top are two different archetypes. There's literally just arcane damage, essentially, Iyslander, and there's Bulllander, which is running the hybrid attacks and disruption, right? So Iyslander has the tools to win major tournaments still, like it always has, but in a variety of styles now, which is kind of crazy. But look at what else is in this top 8. There were, leading up until this event, there were a lot of pro-level players, if you want to call them that, which I think they've, you know, earned because they're high-level players, very high success players, talking about the effects of Warmonger's Recital, the card Warmonger's Recital, on something like a hero like Azalea, basically just turning that off, that hero can just not function on the axis they want to by playing these big non-attacks, firing an arrow, and then just, you know, dominating it beforehand and just pushing damage and disruption on you. And yet there's an Azalea in the top 8. And that is quite interesting, because if we're looking at a field that has the capability of running, and I mean, look, there's 3 Bravos in there. Bravo can run Warmonger's Diplomacy if they want to. Totally functions in the deck. But if you're looking at a field that can run Warmonger's Diplomacy and an Azalea makes it the top 8, do we have to ask the question that a hero that's down on their luck is actually down on their luck? Because you look at that result and maybe it puts everything back into question of, like, okay, what we thought was true about the meta, with Lexi being the best deck and Dromai being, like, perhaps the best deck in waiting after it can kind of go toe-to-toe with Lexi, might not be the case. Warmonger's Diplomacy, a very powerful card in its own right, might not shut down completely the archetypes and the heroes that we would think it would be able to do, right? And then, of course, you've got your one Azuri that sneaks in, which can, always kind of throw your monkey wrench in the works as well. And Azuri actually makes it to the top 4 and loses to Pablo. And shout out to Azuris everywhere, because I think that hero has just always sort of been underrated and under the radar, and yet just consistently top 8ing, which is kind of crazy. And yet the through line for all of these events is that if an Iyslander makes it into the top 8, it just wins. It just wins. Good Iyslander players have the tools at their disposal to win just about every game that they're in. If they get blown out early, then yes, they're put down. But Iyslander has the capabilities to just win games. And it makes us ask the question, what is this meta right now? Is it Iyslander dominant? Is Lexi, is Dromai, is Bravo the hero to tech against, to plan your deck around? Where even are we? And I come back to this idea that we are currently sitting in the most tumultuous, confusing, and beautiful time in Flesh and Blood. Because, as so many people have talked about for the past couple of months, Flesh and Blood very much emulates a fighting game. And this meta is the moment where we step into that fighting game completely. This meta reminds me of Tekken, where if you are a specialist on your character, you can just take King. You could take King, the wrestling cheetah-headed luchador. You take King and you just go spike tournaments. That is what I think of when I see these results week after week. I see a meta trying to be figured out by great, fantastic players, and at the end of it all, I see people executing their hero at a high level and just taking things down. It's so interesting, because you can't look at this and think, okay, in the current breakdown of where this meta is going, Azalea should be, quote unquote, should be way pushed down, right? And yet an Azalea makes the top 8. And then you look at like, well, why is Azuri there? But Azuri makes the top 8. Azuri is just good that people don't ever talk about. Iyslander just kind of slept on prior to this new meta. Just really good because good players playing it, right? Bravo, maybe Bravo is the answer to Lexi, to Dromai. Maybe Bravo just has a nice matchup spread right now. Bravo's showing out. Doesn't have the capability of cutting into it. And yeah, we could break that down into TCGs and say, okay, so now maybe the new triangle meta is Iyslander and Bravo and I don't know, Lexi. Or maybe you really think, you know, Dromai, for example, is the answer. And if there's more Dromais, then now all of a sudden Katsu's better. And then, but you know, Dromai is sort of pushed down by all the poppers that you know that an overall Bravo has available to. It's just you can try to explain it with TCG talk. Shout out to TCG talk, by the way. You could try to explain it that way. And yet I look at this and I just go, you know what's happening is that we're just putting great players into great big tournaments, into great big moments, and they're taking those heroes that they know and they know really well, and they're just proving how to do it. And I think that's perhaps more indicative of where we are right now than anything else. Hey, if you enjoyed this rambly video about the current state of the meta, let me know what you think about the meta in a comment below. And if you enjoyed it, make that number go slightly higher. Huge shout out to all my patrons for making all of this happen. Patreon is a fantastic way to support this channel. If you would like to support me and more videos like this, if you would like to help me raise funds to go to events and you know, do like content things there, if you'd like to see me go where you live and we could hang out together and play a game, feel free to support in a variety of ways. Even just leaving a comment down there and pressing the subscribe button is huge, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart for that. As always, thanks for watching.